The After School Club is brought to you with the help of Satchel, the team behind the UK's #1 homework software for schools, Show My Homework. To find out more what Team Satchel can do for your school, head to showmyhomework.co.uk.
You're listening to the After School Club, a podcast for telling stories about our time at school. My name is Giles, and our guest today is the funniest and most compelling mathematician you're ever likely to meet. His credits include using an overhead projector on the stage of a sold-out Hammersmith Apollo, being described by the Daily Mail as unusual, and being 1/3 of the brilliant Festival of the Spoken Nerd. It's the only Matt Parker.
That's all statistically correct. I think I like an introduction with the word likely in it, just to cover your bases.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't met every mathematician there is.
It's true. So. Until you've done an exhaustive search of meeting all mathematicians, there may be more entertaining ones out there.
How you doing, Matt?
I'm okay. Busy as ever, but zipping around. We were chatting on the way in, and I mean, obviously, we'll cover this later. I used to be a maths teacher, and so actually, I spent today working with some PhD students. So some maths PhD students at Queen Mary University of London who want to run a summer school for secondary school students, specifically year 11s. And so I was sitting down with them and they were suggesting things they could do in the summer school for the students. And I sat there going, no, they don't know how to differentiate yet. And so that was basically my afternoon there.
Well, we will talk about that later, of course, the fact that you have come on this uniquely for one of our guests at kind of two different angles, being a student and being a teacher. I hope that you're a student. It didn't say that on your Wikipedia page. It only said that you were a teacher.
I did the vast majority of my secondary education.
Brilliant. Well, we'll start with the student stuff. Where did you go to school?
That is a good question. So, I mean, do we start primary school? Where do you know?
We could go all the way.
I did the bulk of my education in Australia. In Western Australia. So I grew up in Perth. I went to two different primary schools. I went to Glengarry Primary School, which no one will probably know of, and I went to Karrinyup Primary School, which is also in Perth, and they're very standard, run-of-the-mill, comprehensive primary schools. My secondary education is slightly more different because my parents worked in Indonesia for a couple of years when I was in my early teenage years, and so my lower high school was by distance education. I did correspondence so it's still technically Western Australian curriculum, but I was sat in a library in East Java in Indonesia, and then we moved back to Australia, and I did my last 2 years, which are like the final. Then it was called the TEE. It's the equivalent of A levels, but a year earlier. It's 11 and 12. It is somewhere between GCSE and A levels. Went back and did that in Perth, and so all of it has been Western Australian curriculum, but some of it was just done off-site.
Okay. Did you enjoy school?
I did.
And so much so that you wanted to go back after.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I tried to leave and then I went back, and now to this day I continue going back. I always did. I mean, it's that thing where because my dad taught for a bit, but he was an accountant at heart. He tried teaching and didn't sit with him. And my mum has worked as a librarian and is big into books. And so I'd kind of been brainwashed into liking reading and maths from a young age. And so when I showed up at school, I was already, kind of keen to do it. And I think I had sufficiently enthusiastic teachers to keep me going. So aside from the normal background noise of, adolescence and social awkwardness, I think, the school bits I definitely enjoyed.
How awkward were you?
Pretty awkward. My goodness. You mentioned a thing called Festival of the Spoken Nerd.
Yes.
And obviously we're very big on reclaiming the word nerd. And I think nerd and geek, and these days you can celebrate it and enjoy it. But I was the stereotypical nerd at school. I did do some sports, but because I was going to school in Australia, you're forced to do all sports, right? That's why Australia does better at sports internationally than it should based on its population, because it goes, right, when you're at school, you're forced to play every conceivable sport known to humankind. So if you happen to be good at one of them, that will be discovered, and then you'll be forced to do that for the rest of your life. And I was taken through all of them, and I was probably adequate at basketball and competent, and maybe a hand more, but not many. But no, I didn't have great coordination, and I kind of was the quiet, socially awkward nerd. Like it's, I mean, I hate to sound like a stereotype, but it's disturbingly true.
Well, no, I think during our last episode when we were talking to Phil Wang, we were discussing the fact that the least cool students at school, or the least cool people as children, tend to become the coolest people as adults, and vice versa.
Yeah, from our point of view.
Are you the exception to the rule?
No, yeah, and I am the outlier. No, I think it's a very good point. And, working now with a lot of school students, for a lot of them, particularly when you're a teacher, and even now when I visit schools, a lot of kids, you're like, look, kid, if you just make it through high school, you'll be fine, right? All you got to do is get through this. The moment you land at university and you're amongst peers who all love the same thing, you're set. And so there was definitely a sense of that. But but I also enjoyed the wide range of, once you leave school, you narrow into a single subject, and I kind of enjoyed the wide range. And at the very end of high school was when I first started to be a bit more, come out of my shell socially as such. Not dramatically, but a bit. And when I first started to view making jokes as an academic exercise, basically it's problem solving on the fly in a conversation. I hate to make telling jokes in a social setting sound that tedious, but it is, right? My brain was like, actually, you know what? It's just a case of being fast enough to make the correct connections between concepts to say something which is the correct level of entertaining. And so, yes, there's yet another insight of just how, I explained that with all the flow charts and everything, and I was accepted by my peers. So there you are. Happy ending.
Was maths your favourite subject at school?
It was in my top 2. Yeah.
And the other?
Yeah, physics.
Okay.
I mean, that's, it's practically maths. Up until almost the end of secondary school, chemistry, physics, and mathematics were all pretty close. They were all pretty neck and neck. Chemistry fell by the side when it became more about memorizing things. Like, I think it was memorizing the colors of things that precipitate out in different something metallic something, and you just had to learn it. There was no logic, there was no reason. It was just, hey, memorize this table. And I was like, what is this, biology? And I was like, physics, I can derive stuff, and I was happier with that. And so I still have a soft spot for chemistry, but that's when I parted ways with that. And then physics and maths I probably enjoyed equally, to be entirely honest, while at school. It was only at university when maths pulled out in front.
And do you think that was mostly because you are an analytical person, or did you have an inspiring teacher for those subjects, or was it something else?
I think it was a direct combination of the two.
Okay.
I think I got very fortunate with good teachers as I went along, who were very supportive. They weren't like, hey, you, come over here, we got all this extra cool stuff to do, but they were just good standard teachers who just went, made sure all students were, working as hard as they wanted to. And so my physics teachers over the 2 years I did physics, they were very supportive, very keen, and encouraged me to do extra reading outside of the subject. And so they kind of kept my interest alive. And likewise, the maths teachers made sure I wasn't getting too bored and kept giving me interesting bits of mathematics to do. And I never had a teacher who didn't have a passion for the subject they were teaching me. And so in that regard, I think I got quite fortunate. I also kind of got into a lot of the stuff when I was at primary school, which was unusual. There's a thing called PIAC, which anyone who was a primary school student in the 80s in Western Australia, possibly into the 90s, will recognise Primary Extension and Challenge, the acronym. And they forced us all to do a test, and then a bunch of kids who didn't totally blow the test were like, hey, if you want, one day a week or one afternoon a week, you can go off to this other school and do a different activity. And I was like, oh, sounds like fun. And every term you'd get a menu of things, and you'd pick off your favorite things from the menu, and then you'd be assigned to a thing. And that was when I first did programming. Is when I first did a lot of logical thinking and doing things with puzzles in maths as opposed to just learning it for its own sake. And even things like stop frame animation, like anything that was a bit different and out there. So that's when I first got to mess around with a video camera. And so I was quite fortunate that I got to do that. And that's what I think kickstarted my interest in a lot of these things before I was too young to realize they weren't cool.
So why do you think that a lot of people don't think maths is cool?
That's a very good question. So the problem with mathematics is it can be very boring very easily. And the reason why I was saying, I had teachers who were great and they were passionate about the subject. And I think that's what you need. If you've got someone who's excited about mathematics, they can teach it in an engaging way. The risk comes if you've got someone who isn't confident in maths but is filling in. And so a lot of classes, in my experience in the UK, where I've now had more experience in the education system, are often like a biology or a PE teacher who maths is not their comfort zone, but they're like, well, this is important, right? And so they fill in to teach a year 8 lesson of mathematics. Or, they'll teach, like, often a PE teacher will teach year 8 maths for some strange reason. And it's because they go, this is important, but I'm not at home at it. And the thing is, if you're not comfortable and relaxed in the subject and have a passion for it yourself, it's very easy to teach maths competently by, here's an example, now do an exercise. And so I think the reason that a lot of people have put off maths is because statistically we don't have enough enthusiastic maths teachers that people will go their entire educational career without having a teacher who's just like, look, just do it, and just here's how you do it, and you'll get past the tests. And if you switch off then and you get a bit behind, once you're behind in maths, it's very hard to catch up later. So that's my work. More enthusiastic maths teachers is my working theory.
We'll come back to school and being at school in a minute, but it's interesting, the concept to me of when I had my psychology, I did psychology at A level, and one of the things that my psychology teacher did to kind of tie us into the subject and show us how exciting it can be was do the most exciting thing first, even if it didn't fit into the curriculum that way.
Okay.
Was do the first lesson as the most exciting thing.
Open with something strong, get them hooked.
So what would that be if you were doing that within the maths curriculum?
Oh my goodness, that is a really good question. And see, maths is surprisingly structural. So you learn this, then you learn that, and often it's taught that way. You learn this, and then you build on that, and you build up. But that said, what is often overlooked, it's not so much rearranging the curriculum, but teaching maths. We're often teaching skills, but without without an opportunity to use them. And so I often compare it to something like sport. Like in PE, if you were just forced to learn how to dribble a football up and down the field and pass and stuff, but you never get to play a game, you go, well, this is just tedious. Why am I learning this? Right? But if you play a game, you're like, oh, that's why I'm learning all these skills. And same as music. If you just learned scales, but you never played a song, you'd be like, well, what's the point of learning that skill? And in maths, it's very easy to fall into the trap of just teaching the skills without teaching the reason for them. And so and this is where it gets difficult. You need to find some kind of investigation or puzzle or some enrichment maths activity where students can investigate and play around with a concept, or often literally play around with a physical puzzle or something, or more of an academic thing, where then they can then learn the skills and things they would need later on to do that. And to be honest, a lot of the stuff you learn in maths at school, you're never going to apply in an actual situation. I'm prepared to admit that. But you'd want to find an interesting puzzle or something they can do, and then to get them hooked on learning the skills, and then continue that throughout. So get them hooked early, like your psychology teacher did, but then continue as you go along. And I used to try and do one lesson a fortnight when I was teaching, which contained something not on the curriculum, but which was some kind of enrichment activity that sat next to the curriculum to go, hey, by the way, there's a reason why we're doing this. Here's something a bit open-ended that you can have a play with. So that was my strategy.
Okay. And the other thing that's interesting me about you being at school is you talked about, obviously, you're part of Festival of the Spoken Nerd and nerdiness being something that's been a part of your life since childhood. But, of course, the stereotype of a nerd is someone who doesn't necessarily come out of their shell that much. And your job is to talk on stage to massive groups of people.
It's very true.
And so how did those intersect and when did it happen?
Oh, yeah, good question. So I got into performance and comedy stuff in a big way when I was at university. And so I took a gap year off, which is probably when I started to become a lot more sociable, and then I started to get into this kind of stuff. And then when I was at university studying, that's when I had the real opportunity to get into that. But the beginnings of it were there at school. And so I was at this school for the last 2 years of my high school. And towards the end of it, I started to make some really good lasting friendships and people I still see to this day. And that was where bits of what I didn't realize at the time, but were becoming my very nerdy sense of humor started to come through. So this would be mind-boggling to a lot of people. But when did I finish school? 1997 was my last year of secondary school. And so we didn't have the internet at home. And I bonded with a mate of mine who, back in the days of hilarious email forwards, he had the internet at home. And so he would print out some of these hilarious things, like lists of ridiculous things to do in a lift, or some of these very early classic nerdy humor email forwards, and he would bring them in, and we would sit in our homeroom at the beginning of the day, after they'd done the register and they knew who was there. We would flick through and laugh at these things and try and write our own. And a guy called Simon, who I still work with to this day, and actually we did a podcast together when I was at university, so that kind of grew out of that bonding. We were bored at the back of homeroom, and he would bring in nerdy jokes he found online, and then we printed on dead bits of trees, and we would chuckle over them at the back of the room and try and emulate them.
So that's interesting. I mean, a lot of people get into this as who are performers for their career, get into performing, but yours was more a insular type of comedy. Oh yes. Yeah.
I've always had a very academic, overthought approach to comedy. So actually the stand-up came a lot later on. When I was at university, I got into writing, wrote for the student newspaper, did that. Got a little bit into making short films, did that kind of side of things. Then went into teaching. And so teaching was probably when I first started doing standing up and talking communication. And actually a lot of teachers make good stand-ups because you just have a lot of, not stage time, but you've got a lot of experience standing in front of an audience, talking to them, and at the same time monitoring what they're doing. And so that was when I first got my experience at talking about maths to an audience who probably didn't want to listen about it. And then much later on, after I'd been teaching for a couple of years, then I started doing stand-up on the side as a kind of extreme public speaking training.
Did you ever get in trouble at school?
No, I was pretty down the line. I was late a couple times. That's pretty much it. I did that classic thing where by the last year of school, I was so well behaved and was so under the radar, and the teachers, I was like the teacher, you've got kids, they're going to be fine, you don't worry about them, and kids are fine. So I think we skipped school 1 or 2 days here and there, went down the shops instead. And we were, the last people you're going to suspect of doing that, right? So me and my very well-behaved friends would do that. But that's the lowest, the lamest level of rebellion. We pretty much caught up to what other people were doing in year 7 by year 12. And so, not that I can. I'm trying to remember if I got in any substantial level of trouble, but I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, I was such a boring kid. Oh my goodness. I like to think I was developing skills that now,
what did
serve me well.
So at that age, did you know what you wanted to be when you grew up?
I had no idea. what
Do
I was
you
gonna
know
be when
yet?
I grow up. I still haven't got a plan. No, I really followed my nose and things I enjoyed doing. And so when I was at school, I just picked the subjects I enjoyed doing, which is why I was doing maths and chemistry and physics and those kind of things. Also did economics because, like, yeah, it seems like fun. And then when I went to university, again, I just picked degree courses kind of based on, well, it seems like fun. And as an academic challenge, because I did pride myself. I took a certain amount of my sense of identity out of being good at school and working hard at these subjects and achieving at them. And so I deliberately picked what I thought would be a challenge to do, challenging things to do at university. And then it was only at the end of that where I was like, oh, I need to get a job now. I haven't got a plan for that. And then I was like, well, you know what? I really enjoyed, I'd picked up some tutoring while I was studying at university. And I was like, I quite enjoyed doing that maths tutoring. I was over in the UK for a while when I had like a gap year before I went to university. I wouldn't mind living in London again. I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice if I went to London for a couple of years? And you can get like a 2-year working holiday visa when you're a sufficiently young Australian. But most people then come over and work in like pubs and bars and do the usual working Australian thing. And I was like, man, I don't want to make minimum wage in a pub. And I was like, well, people are always crying out for maths teachers. So I thought, you know what? If I trained as a maths teacher, which I seem to quite enjoy, I could then use that and go and teach in London and travel around Europe. And so I did the 1-year like diploma of education in Australia. And then I taught for a year in Perth because I thought I should teach in my own culture for a bit. And then by that point, actually, I loved it, right? And you discover very quickly if you're doing your teacher training, if it's a thing you're going to enjoy or want to do. And some people do it and they have their first prac and they're in a school and they're like, this is a terrible idea, right? But I was like, it was daunting and a huge amount of work, but I still enjoyed it. I was like, I quite enjoy this. And even teaching around the UK, I loved it. And so I accidentally fell into teaching as a career. And there's a parallel universe me who has continued to be a perfectly happy maths teacher. And then I accidentally fell out of teaching into doing the ridiculous combination of things I do now. So at no point has it been a plan. It's actually been quite good that I had a very scattershot approach to what I was studying and how, in that I've ended up being a bit of a poly nerd. Don't get me wrong, I love maths, and that is my my first love, but I also have a lot of interest in other nerdy, sciencey, programmy, technology things around the edges, and the career I've ended up in is being, doing mass communication. It's super handy that I'm also passionate about maths adjacent subjects. And so that was never planned, but it's worked out quite well that now I can bang on about all range of mathematical things.
In my head, you as a teacher is basically just you on stage, but in a smaller environment.
So I guess
is that accurate as a picture of it?
Not strictly true. Close. I was an adequate teacher, to be fair, and I was never good at behaviour management. That was my problem. Long-term behaviour management, dealing with the kids. What a load of work. And the thing is, you can't be funny with teenagers. And this is an important thing to bear in mind. And that's why I emphasize the stage time is why, or just audience experience time is why a lot of teachers become good stand-ups. It's not because you tell jokes to the kids, right? They're not a good audience for that. The moment a teenager thinks you're trying to impress them, it's all over. And so I was similar when I was a teacher, but just a lot more dry and down the line. And still very passionate about the subject, obviously, but, without that wacky trying to entertain anyone, I think. But actually, what's interesting is the hybrid, probably the closest I get now to what I was as a teacher. I mean, excluding when I visit schools, because I still go in and will run a session with a class of kids, and then I'm pretty much back to being a teacher. But I do a lot of big shows where we get lots of school students into a theatre, and then we run like a maths day. It's called Maths Inspiration Days, and we get loads of maths speakers, and I often host it or do a talk, and that is somewhere between the two, because I'm still dealing with somewhere between 500 to 1,000 teenagers, and so I've got to keep them the correct level of under control, but also there's meant to be a high energy, entertaining day, and so that's where I find it a bit weird because I'm running, one moment I'm telling off a kid who's on their phone, the next moment I'm getting them to applaud because we're bringing on a person who's going to do a talk about how they use maths to, build bridges or something. And that and I quite enjoy that sweet spot where that's the combination of everything I love. Yeah.
Yeah, it does feel like, if I was a maths teacher, that would be my dream in terms of or you taken away all of the annoying stuff when it comes to I need to make sure everyone doesn't pass their
I don't
exams.
Want any teachers listening this to take it as an excuse to leave the profession, but my goodness, just doing the fun bits is great. At least for me, anyway.
Is that because of the competition you'll get if you have a bunch of maths teachers
guys, stay in the classroom.
becoming maths communicators?
Actually, that's an interesting point. But I guess also, what I do now, I'm very fortunate that, so the side of my stuff where I run a thing called Think Maths, which is where me and some other mathematicians go into schools and do talks and workshops that are enrichment stuff and they're designed to help the students be more enthusiastic when they go back to the normal lessons. Because it's easy, and this happens a lot with science, to go in and be shock and awe. Boom, hey, wow, exciting, pow, and then leave. And the next lesson, the kids are like, why are we doing that? That's better. And that's counterproductive, right? So I want to go in and be like, hey, your maths teachers are amazing, and then give them back at the end. And that's the fun bit. I go in, and for a day, I'm still a maths teacher because I want the kids to see me as a peer with their teachers. So I go in and I want to be another teacher who's like, hey, your maths teachers are great, and here's some cool things about maths, and back to your normal teacher. And that I love, right? Because then I'm like, I don't have to meet their parents. I don't have to mark their books, right? It's glorious, right? But what I do miss is the kind of long-term, I don't see the kids develop in their learning, right? And so I go in and I go away, and I don't see any progression in their understanding or learning. And so a little bit of me misses being a normal teacher. But I think visiting schools is enough to say that.
So you don't have to name any names, but did you have any favourite students or least favourite student?
Oh wow, that is a good question.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've had because I taught for 4 years, 4 years in schools, 1 year in Australia, 3 in the UK, and after a while, the kids are just a blur, right? And every so often they come up, I'll recognise kids. Like if a kid walks up to me, another adults, right? A normal, fully grown adult comes up to me and is like, hey, you taught me. And I'm like, most of the time I can remember the school. Yeah. That's I'm not great at remembering their names, but I'll roughly remember them and the class. I do remember I had a gaggle of nerds in my first year of teaching in Australia. They were year 9s, and they were super nerdy. It was great. And so I was their maths teacher. And they were kind of we formed an alliance where, as a teacher, I had to, be the coach for a sport or something. Every teacher has to do this extracurricular stuff, right? And all the kids have to do it as well, right? They got to do all this after-school stuff. And I was like, I could be like, go coach a volleyball team or something. And then I was like, hey, you guys, do you want to learn how to do video editing? And they're like, oh yeah, we'd love to do that. I was like, good. How about, right, we formed a little deal where they really wanted their after-school activity to be video editing. And I was like, well, I guess I can, I won't do a sport. I'm prepared to volunteer to look after these guys. And then yeah, that was it. So we used to they would hang around after school, and they'd run around with the video camera, and I'll show them how to use, oh goodness, Premiere at the time, yeah. And then a little bit of like animation stuff. They were great. They knew what they were doing anyway. I was just there kind of babysitting them. And so yeah, that was my little Cameron and Andrew and Laura and probably some others. if any of you are listening to this, sorry if I forgot your name. If I remembered it, well done.
The gaggle of nerds.
Yeah, my gaggle of nerds.
the draft name for Festival of the Spoken.
Yes, yeah, one of the long list of yeah.
I always find it so interesting, the idea that a teacher can be someone that, you see 100 kids a year or whatever, and you go through, and this just builds up to a massive number. And so many of those kids can remember you so well, but you see so many of them that it just kind of blurs into a...
Yeah, I taught at 4 different schools. So I was never at a school for longer than a year. And so I didn't
Your
have...
choice or theirs?
I kept moving. Never stop. I never saw kids for more than a year. And so I never had that thing where... Because if you teach them from year 7 to 13, you're going to remember, right? If I was at another school with another 700 to 1,500 kids for a year, I repeat that 4 times, at the end of it, I'm like, there's just... the bulk of them, which is a bit of a shame. Again, I didn't do that thing where if you teach in the same school for long enough, it gets easier and easier. And also, after the first 4 or 5 years of teaching, I mean, it's super difficult to begin with, but it's pretty much a hobby by the end of it. And that's what I love when my first year of teaching, I remember one of the teachers, he was like, I've been doing it for long enough now, it's super straightforward. And he'd come in, teach his lessons and go, right, I'm off to the DT department because I'm going to use their tools to reupholster one of my sofas. And I was like, this is great, right? And he'd brought in his sofa from home and then went and used the kit to do it. And I was just like, once you get into the swing of it, teaching at a school is great. Like, it's a really good life. And you're making a difference, right? And so I've never met an old teacher who doesn't feel satisfied at what they've, achieved and done in life. You've made a difference. And so, a bit of me misses that.
And yet you are no longer a teacher.
I know. I also feel guilty because there is a shortage of teachers out there. But part of what I do, so I work super part-time at Queen Mary University of London, and I help run a unit where we get the third-year undergraduate maths students to visit local schools and do projects, and they go in regularly and they assist in lessons, and they do it because it's really good CV fodder before they try and get a job in the city. But some of them, we try and trick them into becoming maths teachers. And now when I visit schools, every so often, once or twice a year, someone will come and go, I did that thing, or I know you're from Queen Mary when I did the course, and now I'm a teacher, right? So I have now contributed more people into teaching than me leaving. So I'm a net gain to the profession. Okay. So I don't feel so bad. So the guilt is I don't feel guilty anymore. And also I'm much more effective at what I do now than if I was in one school. But I do miss it. But not as I don't miss it more than enjoying what I do now.
What do you think a school student would find the most surprising about the reality of being a teacher?
Oh, goodness, that teachers go home at the end of the day. They don't just power down in the staff room. No, so actually, probably that teachers are human, which, now that I say it, is a weird sentence. And part of what I do, part of my training when I'm working with undergraduate university students is I've got to say, look, some people never go back and reevaluate their experiences at school in the light of being an adult. They've only got their teenage memories and they never go back and look at those again. And one of the big shocks that a lot of students have when they then go back into schools is just how human, I guess, the teachers, they're real people, right? And I got to explain the notion of the staff room. I go, right, when you're outside the staff room, you've got your teaching persona on, I guess, right? You're Mr. So, Mrs. So-and-so, whatever, right? And you're in that zone and you put on your teaching persona. And then when you come into the staff room, you can be your normal human. Like, then you can swear again, you can gossip about the kids, all that kind of stuff, right? But then when you go back outside again, you become the teacher. And it's really interesting. What's quite nice is when they come back from then being in schools, they're like, it's true, we saw it, right? And and you watch teachers snap in and out of their teaching persona, and that's why I don't think a lot of students appreciate.
I think that's I mean, this will be a bit of a glimpse behind the scenes for listeners, but we send an email out to our guests before they come along, and one of the lines on that email is, "We are a pro-teacher podcast."
It was in bold, if I remember correctly.
Sorry,
it was in bold, if I remember correctly. Yes, absolutely,
and it's partly so that we don't. The most of the reason why we put it down there is because my parents are both head teachers, and so I'd never diss teachers. And part of the reason for that is because when I was 15 years old, I knew a boy who ate a live spider for £1, Oh, yeah. And that's the brain that people are using to judge their teachers.
It's
and
so
if they
true.
say, my teachers were terrible, they were awful, or I had this one teacher who didn't know how to do their job any one bit, And you think, you were a child.
Yeah.
How do you know anything that they were doing?
Exactly, and it's so funny. Kids just don't And it's weird that, like I said, people don't go back and reprocess their memories for what it was like.
Everyone thinks they know what being a teacher is like because they went to school.
Yeah.
Just
it's a whole different world behind the staff room door.
But I absolutely could be a member of Festival of the Spoken Nerd because I've seen you perform. So,
exactly.
of course,
Exactly. That's all you got to do.
Yeah.
You know. If you've seen up to 2 of our shows, I think you're pretty much ready to fill in. Yeah. You don't see the days and days of writing. Oh my goodness. And it's a very, very good point. And I think it's a bit of a shame, particularly when you do like parent-teacher nights are very interesting as a teacher. And there are my favourite moments where, like, when you'd meet a parent and suddenly their kid would just snap into focus. And you're like, that explains little so-and-so now. And I remember one time I had a kid and I was going to tell their parents, they this and they that. And the usual checklist of they try harder, blah, blah, blah. And I met the dad. And by the end of the dad's opening rambly statement, I was like, you know what? Your kid's doing all right. Suddenly I realized the kid is doing good, right? And I'm just like, yep. Because even some parents just they haven't thought through what it's like. They're still a teenager in their mind when they think about school, which is pretty funny. But teaching is a complicated, difficult, and often hilarious job. And yeah, it's good fun.
Yeah, and I'll say that one of the worst things about having parents who are teachers is that when you get in trouble at school, they will take the side of the teacher, not the side.
So true. Yep. And you would learn very quickly when you're teaching which kids had teachers as parents, because you're like you can speak to them in teacherese, and it's fine.
Right, maths. What is your favourite number and why?
Oh wow, that is a big, big question. My favourite number is currently 383. And I say currently because it changes quite frequently. And who knows, by the time this is edited and put out, it may have moved on. And so the headline for 383 is it is a prime number. It is a palindromic prime number, which is quite nice. And it's also a thing called a Woodall prime, which means, hear me out, it's one less than a number which is a power of 2 multiplied by that power. And so the smallest Woodall prime is 7, because 7 is 1 less than 8, and 8 is 2 times 2 squared.
Okay.
And then, you can see where this is going, right? And then you can carry on up through the rest of them. So the next one must be 31. We can work this out live, right? Because no, it's not. It's 23. Why is it 23? It's 23 because 23 is 1 less than 24, and 24 is 3 times 2 to the 3, because 2 to the 3 is 8, and 3 times 8 is 24. It's 1 less than that, right? And so you get these weird, and you got the correct excited expressions on there, and so they're not particularly interesting. They're not particularly fascinating, but I think they're undervalued prime numbers, and so 383 is my favorite number at the moment because it's one of those. It's also the sum. It's a palindromic prime number, 383. It's also the sum of the first 3 non-trivial palindromic prime numbers, because no 2-digit numbers are prime, because they'd be a multiple of 11. And 1-digit numbers, lame. So 101 is the first proper palindromic prime, followed by 131, followed by 151. And if you add them together, you get 383. And that's also prime and palindromic. And so,
right.
There you go.
How do I apply that to my life?
See, that's where you've gone wrong. It's just thinking that's the wrong question to be thinking. Right.
That's the thing. Everything is maths. I studied psychology at university, and of course psychology is applied biology. Biology is applied chemistry. Chemistry is applied physics, and physics is applied maths. So everything is maths. But
I also take a certain perverse delight in having favourite numbers which are deeply useless.
Yeah.
Because maths has got this image as being a very useful subject, and that's why we force kids to learn it. And some of it, yes, is very, very useful, and some of it, yes, underpins all the modern technology in our modern world. But some of it, some of my favourite bits, are just completely useless, and they're just, academic curiosities. And so I quite like Because as much as I love the applied side of mathematics, I love and delight in celebrating the pointless bits.
I think that's definitely what comes across when you watch your videos on YouTube and when you go to your performances, is you are demonstrating the stuff for the sake of demonstrating it, for the love of the concept itself.
Yeah.
Rather than because the audience is going to walk out and go, I can really save some money on my groceries.
Exactly. Now I can work out the best insurance for my car. Yeah. And that's a little bit about the reason I like the videos is because when, I was at school, unless you've got other peers in the same school who are into the same super nerdy stuff, which I was quite fortunate that I found, Simon and some of these other guys, and all the other members of the school titration team, that unless you find them, you're out of luck, right? Whereas now, doing YouTube videos, students can go and watch these videos and suddenly be plugged into a whole community of other people who do maths and nerdy subjects for the sake of it, out of the sheer delight. And I think it's great that kids can now be straight into that community thanks to YouTube. And so that's why I again take giddy delight in making YouTube videos and live shows. And I do that aspect for our live maths inspiration shows for school kids. We get a lot of applied engineers on, but we always have one person who's just like, I love it for the sake of it. And I think it's important to get that across, and it's just nice that now kids can realise, the kids who do love it for its own sake, go, I'm not alone, other people also enjoy it, just for the sake of it.
And we're also talking about those videos, we should say that if you're interested in finding maths videos online, you can search for Stand Up Maths on YouTube and find his channel.
Yeah.
And it also is not just for students.
No.
I got a U in AS level maths, and I still watch a lot of videos.
Right.
Yeah.
I do have people come up to me and are like, I didn't like maths at school, but now I've seen your videos and you've made me enjoy maths, which I take as a personal achievement. And to be honest, actually, the biggest demographic who watch my videos are people 25 to 34. There are a lot of, obviously a lot of teachers, but a lot of people who are in some kind of career now where that doesn't involve doing a lot of fun maths, and it's a good outlet for them to do it. Yeah, so the Stand-Up Maths is my channel on YouTube, and Numberphile is another big channel I'm involved with lots of other mathematicians that does a similar thing.
So we're going to move on to proper plugs in a moment, but I've got a couple of last questions. The first being, I think as a former teacher and as an educator, you have the right to answer this question, which is, if you could change one thing about education in the UK or in Australia, you had the right to change one thing to improve it, hopefully to improve it, unless you're very mean, what would it be?
Oh, that is really nice. I would... Well, what I want to say is I'd double the salary of all maths teachers, but that's a bit...
Just maths?
It's just maths.
Even physics.
But the problem... Okay, maybe physics, but don't push your luck. The problem is, if you studied maths at university, you can go and have a career making a lot of money in a lot of different ways. And I don't think it's sustainable to have a industry where people who teach maths at school are doing it out of a kind of sense of civic duty because they could make more money somewhere else, but they're going to do this instead, right? Or we just end up with people who are like, they couldn't make money anywhere else, and then they go teaching as a backup. And don't get me wrong, some people are amazing teachers who wouldn't want to be anywhere else. So I would say, frankly, we make it difficult to get enough good, enthusiastic maths teachers by not paying them enough. But that's, if it's actually something a bit more pedagogical, I would say that I would give teachers a certain amount of time off the curriculum. And so I would say something like I think I used to do in my lessons, one lesson a fortnight or one a term or something, whatever is sustainable. You do an enrichment activity or something with your students which is not going to be in a test or anything later on, and the kids and the parents aren't allowed to complain about that. They have to be there. You've got to surprise them. They don't know which day it was, otherwise parents won't send their kids to school if they think it's a day where there's not... You've got to mix it up so it's not all the same, like maths does it on one day. And I've been a teacher, but I'm saying that thinking, yeah, but practically, where are they going to get the resources? So obviously it's going to be fully resourced, and teachers can come up with their own resources, or there'll be ones available. We'll take care of the pragmatic problems, but it means you have permission to do something off the curriculum, and the kids have to do it.
Thank you. Now, to earn your plugs, we have a challenge.
Right.
Your book is entitled Things to Make and Do in the Fourth Dimension.
I mean, that is the plug, so good. Carry on.
The thing is, with most guests, I have a list of things to plug, but I looked at your website and then I looked at your Twitter and things and just thought, there's like 15 things here to talk about, so I'll let Matt decide what he wants to talk about. So we'll give you, 30 seconds.
I can see how many I can earn. Got it right, yep.
But the challenge is, could you explain to us, as though we are Year 7 students...
Mm-hmm. So you're 12. 11 or 12?
10 or 11, I think.
10 or 11? Oh my goodness, make it younger a year. Okay, yep, Year 7s.
What is the fourth dimension?
Oh, wow. Okay, so if it was an older student you'd thrown at me, I'd have to deal with the fact that they all think time is the fourth dimension. And
I thought time was the fourth dimension.
See, exactly, right? And that's because physics, if you're not familiar with how physics works, is whenever physics gets stuck, they wander over to the maths department. They're like, oh, what new stuff have you guys got? Thanks. We're going to repurpose this, right? And so I would say maths is the fourth dimension mathematically is a spatial dimension. So if I had some year 7s, I'd be like, hey guys, you'd start with 2D where some shapes you can draw on a flat surface because you can go side to side and you can go up and down. And you can draw a square, which is quite nice. And because in 1D you can draw a straight line, 2D you can draw a square, 3D you can make a cube. Kids love making cubes. Get some straws and some pipe cleaners. It's incredible, right? And then you've got 3 different directions you can go because you can go forwards and backwards, side to side, and up and down. And sadly, that's when we run out of spatial dimensions. I would then argue, imagine there's a hypothetical fourth spatial dimension. And annoyingly, it's got to be at right angles to the first 3. And so we can't do it. But the kids are quite happy. If I said draw a cube and gave them a flat piece of paper, they'd draw a cube anyway. And they'd either draw it with perspective, so they'd make one face a lot smaller than the others and then have like angled lines drawing them up, or they'd just skew it out, so they would draw one square and then the other face off to the side, then link it all up. They're the 2 ways you see cubes drawn in 2D, and you can use both of those to make a 4D cube, because even though we can't fit the fourth dimension into our 3 dimensions, it's the same as when you take a 3D cube and draw it in 2D. You either get one of the 3D faces of the 4D cube, make it smaller, and then link it all up, or you just skew the whole thing off to the side, and you can build both of those out of straws. And so the perspective one, you end up with a cube inside a cube, and the corners join together. But then at that point, it's nice to show some animations of what it looks like if you set it moving, and you can start to play around with it that way. For older kids, so they're like, no, it's time. You're like, ugh. Okay, so some physics theories do use time, but that's subtly different because you haven't got the same freedom of time. Insists on going in one direction, we think. Whereas spatially, I just want to use it as another direction you can move in. And some very cool things happen to bits of mathematics when you generalize them up into 4D.
All right, so if you didn't understand that, buy the book.
And, yes. If I get that wrong, it's still a plug to buy the book.
Exactly. Now, let's do the actual plugs. What else is there? So we talked about the book. What else? You've got free reign to talk about what is important right now.
Dimension. I have so I mentioned Think Maths. That's when I go, or maybe I didn't, depending on the edit. I'll do that clean. So I have my Think Maths organization, which is me and other people going into schools. We have free resources. We have free resources on the website thinkmaths.co.uk, and so whenever we it's dependent on how much free time I've got. We put resources and stuff on there, and people can go and download them and play with them, which is good fun. I think the one thing and Maths Inspiration, the big maths shows. I also run a thing called Maths Fest, which is the same thing, but it's a bit of a bigger scale. We run those right across the UK, and we've got DVDs if you can't get your kids off timetable. So Maths Inspiration, totally worth looking up. I think the one thing that hasn't come up at all that I will plug is a website I run called Maths Gear. And that is my nerdy maths toys website. And that started when I was like, this thing doesn't exist, but it would be a cool maths thing. Or, this guy did some good maths, that should exist as an object. And it's really expensive to get stuff made unless you get thousands. And to do that, you better sell them on a website. And so I started a website called Maths Gear, which is not explicitly teaching focused, but a lot of the stuff I think in terms of how would this be useful in the classroom, and some of the things you can buy as a class set, and we'll give you a free set of resources that people have developed like weird dice and shapes and all sorts of stuff. And anything on the website, if you do want it to use with a class of students, just send us an email and say, hey, can you sort out a class set of this? And we'll see what we can do. And we've got cool mathematical stickers. I mean, if that hasn't sold people, I don't know what more it's going to take.
There we go. And then the basic stuff, your website is...
standupmaths.com.
Your Twitter handle is...
standupmaths.
Your YouTube channel?
Standupmaths. I came up with a good name and I run with it.
Brilliant. All right. So, it just leaves us to say, the After School Club is brought to you with the help of Satchel, the team behind the UK's #1 homework software for schools, Show My Homework. To find out more about what Team Satchel can do for your school, head to showmyhomework.co.uk. Hit the subscribe button, give us 5 stars on iTunes, follow us on Twitter @TASC Podcast, and like us on Facebook. The After School Club is hosted by me, Rhys Giles, and produced this week by Henry Otwell, and of course our guest was Matt Parker. The theme tune you're about to hear is Better at Getting Worse by Bakito. It's on iTunes and Spotify, and they are on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you join us again for the next episode of the After School Club.
And I never come down from